Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us on another episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Today's guest is Caitlin Goerlich. Caitlin is a contemporary romance writer whose debut novel, The Silent Summer, was published in May of 2021. She holds a bachelor's degree in English with a focus on creative writing from Kean University. At a young age, Caitlin was diagnosed with kyphoscoliosis, which is an abnormal curvature in the spine. Complications and surgery caused her to have a spinal cord injury, and she became paraplegic. When Caitlin is not writing, she is enjoying life by competing in adaptive sports, spending time with friends and family, recording videos for her YouTube channel, and being a motivational speaker, as well as the chairperson and board member of the Tri-State Wheelchair Athletic Association Board. All right. Well, hi, Caitlin. Thank you so much for being our guest today. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So some of our listeners might not be familiar with you and your work. So could you please just tell us about yourself?
Again, I'm Caitlin, and I am 28 years old, and I have a spinal cord injury since I was 4 years old due to complications in surgeries. And through the year, I also did adaptive sports for the last 22 years now. Wow, that's a long time. Where I do track and field, table tennis, and archery. I even did fencing for a couple years. And I also am a writer, just published my first book. And I'm also on YouTube where I share different videos on different topics, and disability is one of the main topics as well.
Awesome. And so you mentioned your spinal cord injury. Would you be comfortable sharing with listeners exactly how that affects you in terms of your abilities?
So with my spinal cord injury, I can't feel. I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I can't move the waist down, but I can't feel from my ribs down. So I am a wheelchair user, and I just basically, I need help transferring up and down the stairs in my house with my parents. But I do have my own car that I'm able to drive to places, especially to work, where I work at a department store. And other than just needing help here and there, I'm mostly independent.
Awesome. And I don't think you mentioned that you are a published author. I feel like we need to hear more about your book.
Yeah, so I just recently published it about a couple weeks ago, I believe it was May 28th. It's a young adult summer romance with like a little twist where the heroine doesn't use her voice. And so the relationship is really based on figuring out how to communicate with one another without really using her voice, and her figuring out in the end if she's ever going to use her voice again. Because the reasoning is her mom passes away at the beginning, and the last words she said to her were, "I love you," and she didn't really want any other words to come out after that. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm happy. It was a long time coming, especially this book that I started writing it about 11 years ago.
Wow.
And it took breaks here and there, but it's finally out, and it's out, and I'm happy.
How, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer, and have you always had that sort of writer's imagination?
I have always wanted to be a writer. I think I knew from a very young age. I can't remember exactly the moment where I'm like, yes, I want to be a writer. But it's been I would always have like a little notebook around where I would just write down some thoughts and here and there. And then when I was like 7 or 8, I actually started writing a play that starred my sister's friends and some of my family members. And that was like 21 years ago. And I just ran into one of my sister's old friends, and he still remembers that. And he still wants to know when he's going to be in it. And I'm like, no, that's a long time ago. But I think that was like my first, oh, I can definitely do this. And then as I got older, I was doing more writing, and it just all finally came together.
Mm-hmm. And you're self-published, is that right?
Yes.
What was that process like?
It was hard. It took me a while to figure the ins and outs of self-publishing. I did try to go the traditional publishing way, trying to find an agent, but like everyone is looking for agents, and agents are very particular about who they want to represent. So for a couple of years, I tried doing that. And then last year, I was like, all right, maybe, because at first I was against self-publishing. I don't know why. And then I realized most of the authors that I read are self-publishers. So I'm like, oh, so maybe I should try it. And then I just did some research on finding a book editor because you want it to be polished. So, and then I looked for a book designer, and then I just went from there, and then looked into the different online retailers to actually publish. And there was a lot of research because you can either do the online retailers yourself or do a book distributor.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of make more money doing it myself. So I was like, let's go that way for the first book and see how that goes. And then maybe I'll try the book distributor in the future. But right now it's a lot more work doing it myself, but in the end I think it's better for me doing it more myself.
Well, good for you. And so you do have plans to write more books in the future, it sounds like.
Yes, I do.
Very cool. Well, you also mentioned that you have been a part of the world of adaptive sports, and I'd love to know more about how you got introduced to adaptive sports and what your experience has been with that.
So when I was 5 years old, I was doing physical therapy. I had a lot of energy, so my parents wanted some form of getting me to put my energy into something. So one of the physical therapists at the hospital I went to was actually one of the assistant coaches of the hospital's adaptive sports program, the Children's Lightning Wheels out of Children's Specialized Hospital in Mountainside. And she introduced me to the head coach, who said she knew me prior. And then I joined the team, and I started out just doing track and field. And then when I was 13, I added table tennis. And then 2010, I added archery. It was a lot of work, but honestly, if it wasn't for the lightning wheels, I don't know who I would be today, because they were all about like being independent, teaching us how to be independent, also advocate for ourselves, as well as having fun. And we also get to meet other people with similar or different disabilities, which not a lot of people get that opportunity. And I meet people now who struggle with having a disability, and there was never a point where I had it because I've surrounded for so long with other people with disabilities, and we were always open about our struggles, and it was like a family, and I still keep in contact with like 90% of everyone that I met over the years. And without adaptive sports, I don't know where I would be right now.
You make a great case for everyone getting kids into adaptive sports, kids with disabilities.
Definitely recommend it.
Very good. And so besides adaptive sports, what are some of the extracurricular activities that you've been involved in over the years?
I've actually did competed in the Miss Wheelchair New Jersey competition a couple years. The second one I was the runner up, and I did was named the ambassador, and it was interesting. I was not as like when I first was asked to do it, I wasn't sure because I wasn't sure how it all worked. But I ended up meeting other great advocates for disabled people and just making new friends. And so it opened my eyes even more in the disability world. I've also do a YouTube channel, as I mentioned at the beginning. I do a lot of pop culture reaction videos, but I also speak about my disability and even have some guests on my channel to speak about theirs or just speak about random things. Hopefully, get more people onto my channel. I even have a blog, but I haven't really wrote anything on there in like a year, I think. And then before that was like a couple years before that. A blog is hard to keep up with, especially when you don't have anything really to write about. Which is why I think I tend to do my YouTube more because I feel like I'm more better speaking about situations and things than writing it. I've also was involved with local organizations like the Elks program. I've done a lot.
Yeah, I can tell that you've done a lot, and you even mentioned that you work at a department store. Is that right? How is
Yes,
how is that for you, and how is searching for employment as a person with a disability?
Very hard. You have to look into more things than someone without a disability. Like, is the building accessible? Or are they open to changing little things here and there to make it more able for you to work out? Which I got lucky with where I work right now because they never question what I can't do or what I can do. They just threw me in anywhere. And I work mostly on the registers. So at my store, the registers are actually kind of closed off. But the first thing they did is they took like one of the walls off the register so that they can make it accessible for me. And then they lowered the screen. They moved the printer out so I could reach the receipts better. And if I ever need like accommodations, they're like, let us know, we'll help you out. I know not everyone gets that opportunity. Yeah. And it's very hard. Like, I'm still, as much as I love where I'm working, there's always opportunities of looking somewhere else just to see. But it's very hard because, again, not everyone, even though it is the law to give everyone an opportunity, they're not really giving everyone an opportunity. Because I know I've had friends who have gone on interviews and the first question they're asked is, are you sure you can do this? And he actually answered like, well, I wouldn't have applied if I didn't think I could do this. So that's a big situation. But I'm lucky where I am right now because they're like, you're actually better than some of the other workers that we have, and you do more than what they do. So
wow, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm glad that you have had such a successful employment experience, but just like you said, it's unfortunate that it's not like that everywhere. And I think, one big myth that we see a lot from the employer side of things is that they think it's going to be real expensive or, some huge ordeal is going to have to happen in order to accommodate someone. But it sounds like, in your case, it was just kind of some simple changes that made it perfectly accessible for you. And you've been a great employee. So
Yeah, it's not hard for employers to actually, I feel like they need to talk more with the disability community and maybe open the dialogue, and maybe they'll be able to be like, oh, it's not as hard as we think it is. And they're probably missing out on their best employee by not really expanding it to the disability community.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we learned a little bit before the call about this really awesome advocacy project that you've been a part of with the inclusive Bitmojis. So I'd love if you could talk to us more about that and what all of that entailed.
So the inclusive Bitmojis started 2 years ago, which is crazy to think. I've always had a Bitmoji, and I'm pretty sure when I first created the Bitmoji, this came to my mind that there weren't any wheelchairs, but I wasn't really thinking about it. But then I remember clearly it was my birthday and Easter, and it was the first time my birthday landed on Easter. And I remember I was sending out a thank you message for those who were wishing me a happy birthday. And my cousin came back and said, it's springtime. I think it's time to change out of your winter clothes. I'm like, all right. So I went and looked to change my Bitmoji, and I'm like, you know what? I haven't really looked into this. Is there a wheelchair for me to put my Bitmoji in? And I noticed, no, there wasn't any wheelchairs. And then I went and even did more. I'm like, there's no amputees, there's no prosthetics, there's pretty much nothing for the disabled community. And I was like, we're not being represented now. So I was thinking, okay, what can I do to maybe have this conversation start? So a few days later, I did a YouTube video on my channel, and then I started a change.org campaign, and I posted them, and nothing really came about from that. So I was like, all right, now I'm just going to take a picture of my Bitmoji and post it to Instagram. And then that really started it, because I had really huge help and support. So one of my high school teachers basically came on board, and for the last 2 years, we really pushed the inclusive Bitmoji, and we were getting some answers from Bitmoji themselves, but the generic answer, like, yeah, we're working on it. Yeah, no worries, we hear you. But you guys been saying that since Bitmoji started, so we didn't really believe them. And then I think they were starting to actually get annoyed, because every time someone signs the campaign, it gets tweeted to their Bitmoji Twitter, and they were like, okay. And then everyone who saw the campaign did their own tweets to Bitmoji, which was awesome, because it was getting them to really, okay, we really need to get this done, or else we're going to be annoyed even more. And so they came out with a less generic answer, like, all right, we got it. We hear you. It's very hard. We're trying to get. I'm like, it's not that hard. You already have a beach chair. Just put wheels on it. You have cars. It's not that hard. We want also service animals. You have a dog. Put a vest on it. It's really not that. It's not as hard as they were trying to make it. And so then finally, earlier this year, I didn't even know it until I saw one of my friends post about it, that they added stickers that included wheelchairs. Finally, it finally happened. It's not exactly what we were asking for because, like, we actually want a wheelchair to be a part of our avatar, but it's better than what it was. And now they're actually, Emojis now actually asking for more input on what they can do to expand their disability representation. So I'm actually very happy that they finally showed. That's all I really wanted was them to show that they were doing something about it, not just say they were doing. It's better to show than just tell us. So after 2 years of annoying them, which I love doing, they finally came out with a group of stickers, and I love sharing them on my Twitter, Instagram, and my messages. So, but we need more. It's not done yet.
Yeah.
We need more.
Well, that's a great accomplishment so far. I bet that feels awesome to know that you were very likely responsible for getting that ball rolling.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely other people that had started it had started something years ago, but they didn't like pursue it. And then there were others who mentioned things along the way. So I think as a whole, with everyone really working together, whether it was really together or on our own, I think it was finally a good stepping stone.
And do you think that persistence is really what the key was to getting them to make a change?
Yes, I do. I feel like once you start something, don't stop until it happens. Which my teacher, my high school teacher said he was gonna do. He said he wasn't gonna stop until he saw something, and I was like, okay, that means I'm definitely gonna have to keep going because if he was honestly, if he wasn't as involved with this, one of my friends and I think it probably wouldn't have gone as far as it did. So I'm definitely thankful for him being a part of it because honestly, we do think without his help, it would probably we'd probably still be waiting.
Well, that's awesome. So you mentioned that you became a wheelchair user when you were really young, like 3 or 4. And so I'm curious to know when and how did you learn about the Americans with Disabilities Act? And how do you feel like it impacts your life today?
So, being a young wheelchair user, I learned Americans with Disabilities Act through the Lightning Wheels, the adaptive sports program that I grew up a part of, because they told us, okay, according to the ADA, we could do this, do that, do this, and our coaches made sure that all the hotel rooms and everything was specifically for us whenever we had to go away for sporting events. And at a young age, we were like, why? What does that mean? So, with the coaches explaining the ADA and even my parents and some of my teachers, I think, who were, I don't know if they were my teachers or they were just people in the school system that knew about the ADA, they were like, you have the right, these are your rights according to ADA. And I learned very young. I don't remember the moment where I learned about exactly what the ADA was, but I definitely learned very young. And I believe without the ADA, we would probably be still stuck in our houses. And again, then we probably wouldn't have the opportunity to do adaptive sports because then the buildings would not be accessible because there are still some tracks that don't allow wheels on it, which is against the law. But then you have to fight for the wheels on the track, like wheelchairs. We're like, well, Skateboarders, maybe, but you have to let the wheelchairs on because
Right.
that's, the law. I owe to having the ADA because, again, without any of that, I would not be where I am today, and I would not know the people I know, and inclusive emojis would have never happened because I would have never known any of these other situations, and I don't know where we would be today without the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's actually a scary thought.
Yeah. So what do you hope for the future of accessibility in the ADA? How do you think it could be better? And what are some of the challenges that you've still dealt with, even though the ADA has been in place?
I feel like there's a lot that could be better, like having every building somewhat accessible, even if they're like 1,000 years old. And but like I do know that there's ways to make buildings accessible even without needing to put an elevator in. It's just a little ramp would help, no matter, because I've gone to buildings where there are no way of getting in. Or what would also be helpful is the people who work in the building be honest at how many steps there really are in the building. Because my sister's bachelorette party about 9 years ago, we went to a building and they told my sister's friend that there were only like a couple steps. And we showed up, there were like 15 steps, and we're like, yeah, that's not a couple steps. How is this gonna happen? And so they actually had a couple of their workers carry me up. And I think they moved to a different building that is now accessible. But again, I think there needs to be everyone needs a way to make a building accessible without, yes, I know a lot of people say, well, it's too much money. Well, you're missing out on customers that you could add money to your business if you open it up to everyone, because you're leaving out a lot of people. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, yes, you're spending money to make it accessible, but you're also making money by opening it up to more people.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say good access is good business.
Exactly.
And you said that some workers carried you, but I bet I can imagine that's not an ideal, solution for you.
No, right? not. It would be easier if I could just go there, go up a ramp or a chairlift, or yes, people can add a simple chairlift.
Right.
It doesn't have to be an elevator. Just a simple chairlift would do wonders. Like, it doesn't have to be a huge renovation for the building, just a simple chairlift.
And it makes a world of difference to you
It does.
and wheelchair users and
a
people with disabilities.
workable chairlift. Because I've been to places that the chairlift doesn't work or is shaky, and those are not safe.
So, you mentioned, sort of the prospect of if businesses are accessible, then they can be doing more business and making more money. What else would you like listeners to know about accessibility for people with disabilities?
That it's important. Not only will you be bringing more business into the actual business, but it's more social interaction with one another, because there's a lot of people who still have never interacted with someone with a disability. And if they see them on the street, they're like, oh, I've never, do I say hi or do I just stare at them? Say hi, people. Staring is creepy and freaky. It's okay to ask questions, but say hi first. But again, if more people are able to go into buildings that are accessible, then more interaction can happen, which can also bring more social acceptance as well, which is definitely needed in today's society.
Well, I imagine as a writer, you must be a reader too. So I'd love to know, what are some of your favorite books?
Oh yes, I am definitely a reader. I'm definitely into young adult and contemporary romance, whether it's new adult or adult and young adult. Wow, my favorite books. There's a lot. I know my favorite authors. Definitely Nicholas Sparks. My favorite book of his is probably The Last Song. I think that was really my first book I read of his. Yes, it wasn't. I never read A Walk to Remember or The Notebook, but I've watched the movies. But Nicholas Sparks definitely knows how to bring the emotions out in the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I try and do in my stories. Lucy Score is another great author. My favorite book of hers is Rock Bottom Girl because her characters are always very relatable. And Rock Bottom Girl was like a girl that thought she was going to have this amazing adult life and career and everything. And then she ends up back in her hometown and living with her parents and it's so relatable. And then she learns to appreciate the life she has. And I like those kind of books that are relatable, but also totally out there and wanting to give people just away from their own lives and just go into others. Oh, Myla Gray is another great one because one of my favorite, I forget which one, but another great book of hers, which I forget which one, but in one of her books actually spoke about the importance of Hollywood representation of disabled people. And I was like, yes, I like it. I forget which one it was because she had like 4 or 5 in the series, but I was like, yep, I'm supporting this author because she gets it.
Awesome. Okay, we will have our listeners check out those authors. Caitlin, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and to get in touch with you, and most importantly, to read your book?
So I have a website, CaitlinGoerlich.com. I am pretty much everywhere. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. Those are C Goerlich, CGoerlich. On YouTube, you can actually just search for Caitlin Goerlich, or you could go to youtube.com/the C Goerlich because C Goerlich was taken. I don't know by who. And I'm also on TikTok, but I'm not really involved that much. I tried, but I already have all this other YouTube stuff going on. I have a blog. You can check that out. It was under wikywheels.blogspot.com. And yeah, and my books are, and I'm also on Goodreads. And my books right now are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and Kobo.
Awesome. And we'll put all of those links in the show notes. Well, thank you so much today, Caitlin. This has been an awesome conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted and produced by Emily Schumann, and our sound engineer is Jessica Lucania. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DP0094-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.